Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast, and this is episode 47. Can't believe I made it this long. Hopefully, I'll make it to 50 at least. Anyway, on this week's episode, Happy New Year. New Year will be coming. Uh, this week's episode, I wanted to talk about sort of different American ancestry zones, if you will, or sort of places with sort of very distinct ancestry. And I wanted to do this to sort of clear up, I think, some kind of misconceptions about America that some outsiders have. Although it's getting better, these misconceptions aren't really as bad as they used to be. But I just wanted to take a moment to talk about it. So, anyway, before I even start, I will say you should probably read the book American Nations. It's a great book. It basically defines America and most of North America as 11 different nations and sort of talks about their cultural history and why they've become what they are. And I do agree with a lot of it, although there's some things that I disagree about because it it puts Wisconsin in with upstate New York and with Massachusetts and calls that all Yankeedom. And I see those areas as culturally different. Now, some people don't. I have met people who say that being in New England is very similar to being in Wisconsin, Michigan, but I think Wisconsin, and Michigan are different. So, and that's sort of what I'm gonna get into here in one part. But anyway, so when we think of America, I think a lot of people think of it, and don't get me wrong, America started as an English colony. Well, at least what became our central government in Washington D.C. started as a English colony. So, and we do still speak English. I'm talking to you right now in English. So, yeah, I get why people, when they see America, they see us as like a bastardized England, okay, or a larger England that has a lot of remnants and traits there, and it's true to an extent, okay. But I think, fortunately, I will say this: most people, when they see outside of America and see California, do see that California is different. I would say most people. Some people don't, but most people do. But what a lot of people don't know is there isn't just a sort of Anglo-white group of people and a Mexican group of people, and then black people interspersed in between African Americans. That's not it's not that simple. I wish it were that simple, but it's not that simple. There's not some simple line and definition of that kind of group. There's just not, and that's what I'm going to break down a little bit more. So yes, when we look at sort of how modern day and Texas in California, New Mexico, and Arizona have been historically, they were originally part of Mexico. Okay, well, part of the colony of Spain that became Mexico. So, there is always going to be a certain Latin American flavor to them. You're always going to have these, the food, obviously, the Tex Mex food or the street tacos and stuff like that. That is always going to be there, and that's always going to make up a large group of the population there, if you will. But that being said, California has an interesting thing where it also has a large Japanese American population in places and a large Chinese American population in places. So California is quite an interesting mix. It's a very mixed up state. But so when we talk about a major ancestry group, though, so that's what we're talking about. It sort of is what it looks like there. You can just see the influence on the culture. I was also very surprised to learn when my parents went to Texas. There are parts of Texas that have a strong German culture, which I had never sort of considered that. But there was a group of Germanic people that do like the Wild West culture. In fact, it was very popular in Western Germany in the 70s to roll around trying to look like Wild West Americans. So, hey, whatever floats your boat. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. So yeah, so we see it play out though, right? You see like I said, street tacos and sort of just just a sort of attitude of, I don't know what I would call a sort of Mexican attitude. I guess it is a largely hardworking but also agrarian attitude, and you can see in California where they've, a lot of the agriculture in America actually does come out of California, and Texas. So we think of the when we think of California and Texas, we think of places like Dallas in the oil, or Houston in the oil, or you know San Francisco and the technology and stuff like that. But a lot of their economies are still based on agriculture, and that's not to say that the Midwest also is based on agriculture too, but it is part of, I think, the Mexican tradition. There's a lot of agriculture in Mexico too still. It is very there is a bit of an agrarian mindset to this day that that permeates there, and a hardworking mindset. So anyway, now we're going to talk about a different sort of another sort of settlement pattern, if you will. And the one I'm going to touch on now is sort of the French. A lot of people don't realize there is a bit of French influence still sprinkled throughout America. Granted, it was somewhat tried to people tried to minimize it over the years, but it exists. Especially obviously in Louisiana first, and you just see it with this sort of pageantry around religion there, and sort of the old school Catholic Episcopalian stuff, which Episcopalian is English, I understand, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it. There's just a lot of ornateness, and Louisiana, when they make their food, they are trying. I wouldn't say they're trying to be snooty. That's not a proper way of putting it, but they are trying to have an air of culture and elegance. That the rest of America, I don't think, cares about as much. So they definitely it's definitely pervasive there, and you can even see it a bit in some places in upstate New York and Wisconsin, and places right across the Great Lakes from Canada, because that's where the original French settlers sprinkled in. You can see it every once in a while where people there's a craving for some more elegance that probably isn't craved in other places in America. And it's cool. It's interesting to see all this stuff interplay. Now, obviously, what I have the most experience with is being my parents were born in Wisconsin, and it's very German. I mean, it's one of the more Germanic states than anyone else. I think the only one that ranks higher in Germanic ancestry is North Dakota, and it's yeah, it's just very very German, very you can see it. There's well, obviously Wisconsin's famous for all the beer from Milwaukee, and it's just sort of the cultural attitude. Like up there, people are very I don't know, the everything's very organized. The streets are very organized. Everything's organized. Time is very organized. You don't waste people's time. You show up, or what the old people up there do is this is hilarious. So up there, the restaurants have these signs out that they've added to their signs that says "now seating" in neon lights, because the population of Wisconsin has been getting kind of older in certain places, and old people will not go to a restaurant up there if it looks like the parking lot is too full, because they'll just assume there's nowhere for them to eat in there. So, it's sort of stuff like that, and I haven't really noticed that kind of stuff in other places that aren't as German as Wisconsin is. And yeah, it's and the food is very heavy up there. I mean, I get told all the time, well, it's a very heavy looking food you're eating there, especially with like they make these big old cheese ball things that you have when you put all your crackers on it. Then they drink all this beer, and there you did feel kind of fat sometimes. It's a very heavy lifestyle. But then, Wisconsinites also are known as very hardworking too, I think, in a lot of ways. When you think of Harley Davidsons, you think of a real tough motorcycle, or some of the older things from Wisconsin. So, in the USS Wisconsin was a very tough battleship, you know. So it's sort of the Germanic can-do, hardworking attitude, but it's also, like you said, it's a very organized thing. Like if something's not organized, they freak. Yeah, it's got to be organized in a certain way up there, you know. And so the so now that I've sort of hit on different areas, we'll talk about New England a bit. So obviously, when you talk about sort of the northeastern part of the United States, especially if you're talking about New England or going from New York and heading further northeast, it's very English influenced, except for parts of Boston are very Irish, but that's not much different than saying it's very English influenced. Oh, I'm just kidding, Irish people. I don't want to get a bunch of hate mail. Anyway, but the weird part about that is as as a Midwesterner, and then sort of just in general, is that leads us to a bit of mistrust of them because do uh they definitely do. What am I trying to say? They feel like they are still kind of connected to England in some ways. In fact, there was a movement started up there in Massachusetts during the War of 1812 uh to surrender and become a part of England again. Yeah, look it up if you don't believe me. And that's what ultimately killed one of the parties. The early Federalist Party was because some of them were affiliated with that movement, and it's very strange to think about in modern times that it actually happened. But so and I think you see it too with like up there. I always see people out there trying to see if they have heritage back to like English lords or, you know, English gentry or something like that. And it happens some in Virginia and North Carolina too, because those are also predominantly English settlement. But it just seems like in New England, there's more of a pretension about it. I don't know. There's more of a like, yes, I can trace myself directly back to Henry the Seventh, like, and I mean, that's fine. It's just different for me growing up in sort of the Germanic area. Now I'm in Kentucky, which is a mixture of English and Scots Irish with a little bit of German sprinkled in and other things too. It's weird to me to want to be so affiliated with that. But then again, some people really like it and are really into it, and obviously America wouldn't exist as we know it without the influence of England. But it's crazy, it's it's a different cultural mindset. And I think the problem I experience with a lot of European people I talk to and even people in some other countries is they assume that sort of attitude is all of America except for like California and Texas, which they assume again is mostly part of the Latin American attitude. And no, there are other regions in between that behave differently, that are culturally different. So another final place I wanted to talk about is Florida has now it does have an Hispanic culture, but it's a different kind of one. So in South Florida, you have a bunch of Cuban people who settled there because they didn't want to be a part of what Castro was doing, and you also have old Spanish people who came over who wanted to be cowboys and things. So and then in northern Florida, you have your white folk of, I would say, Scots Irish types or even some Germans too. And it's so weird. It's a strange place. It doesn't have one group of peoples. It's very mixed and it's wild. It's like five states within one culturally, and it's cool. It's cool, and it's sad that people try to say, well, this type of Florida is the Florida. The thing that drives me nuts about that in Florida and part of the rest of America too is, especially when we roll around to election season, you get people come in there, well, this type of person should win in Florida because they represent these values, and it's just not true in a state the size of Florida. You really got to get in touch with your voters because it's like five different kinds of states. And I also saw this play out even here in Kentucky. I was hearing people say, well, this person should win in Kentucky because these people voted this way, for however many elections. And it's like, no, I mean, there's Kentucky. it's got its mountain region in the eastern part. It's got its coalfield hilly region in the western part. Its bluegrass region in the middle, and northern Kentucky practically feels like the Midwest. So no, one type of values isn't just going to win. You really got to be a statesman to win. You can't just be one straight up stereotype. And I think that's what really and that bothers me more so on a national scale than a state level, because I don't get me wrong. Like I want, and me and Malik covered this in our first interview, on episode 5. But I just, when you say one set of values represents America or American values, I take a bit of umbrage with that. Obviously, my grandfather fought in World War II against the Nazis, and he signed up to. And I guess maybe deep down that is part of what we could call quote unquote American values. But it's really hard to say in a country our size, you know, and we're like we're one of the 5 largest countries in the world by population and land size. And, I wouldn't run around saying, I'll put it this way. I don't run around saying there's one particular type of values that prevail in Russia. I'm sure you listened to my prior episode when I say a certain type of leader has to be in charge of Russia. But even then, Eastern Siberia, Moscow, different things. I mean, that's the whole thing with the Bolshevik Revolution. There were still holdouts. There's even been capitalist holdouts for years in parts of Russia. You can't just. That's why in Russia they have to govern with an iron fist, is to enforce their values down from Moscow. Whereas here in America, because we were set up, at least our founders attempted to set up a federalist system of, sort of bottom up governance. Uh, you know, we don't, and that's why I sort of have a lot of issue with the way Washington has been run the last 50 years. But we want to be a place that you don't need to govern with an iron fist top down. It shouldn't be that way. Everyone should feel like, sort of, at some level, their state and local identities are allowed, but they're also part of the greater good. And, it doesn't always work out, but we've made it work for a while, and it's very scary to me that it's starting not to work, that people want to sort of disrespect the things that are great about America to me, which are, this how I can drive, you know, 5 hours and be in something completely different. You know, where else in the world can you do that? You know, and yeah, so we all have different heritages, and the sort of English heritage is, not the overall dominant heritage. Although, even though the German won the Ancestry poll, I wouldn't say German is the strongest cultural heritage in America. We're just a mixture of a bunch of different kinds of cultural influences, and it makes it hard to govern a lot. It really does. And but I would rather live in a country. I don't know if I could handle living in a country that is focused out from the center of a really strong central government. That would be such a weird change for me. I don't know if I would like that. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, keep listening, know your place, and have a good one. Peace.